Okay, over to you, Jan.
Okay, thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Jan Short. I'm General Secretary of the National Pensioners Convention, and welcome to our Dignity Day webinar. And this is a special webinar to mark Dignity Action Day in 2022. It's called The Perfect Storm Behind Pensioner Poverty. Now, one of the biggest scandals in the UK today is the steep rise in older people who are forced to choose between eating and heating their homes. Age UK estimates that a fifth of all retirees, that's more than 2.1 million, are living in poverty after paying their housing costs. And of those, 1.1 million are living in severe hardship. People aged over 85 are most affected, and women are worse affected than men. Situation is set to get even worse this spring. Rising inflation, ill-conceived government policy decisions converge to create a perfect storm of financial misery for millions more. The perfect storm is a financial misery for anyone who is a pensioner, any family on low income. To discuss this issue, the causes and the potential solutions to this crisis, I would like to introduce you to our panel of speakers. And today we have Karen Smith, MP, who is the Shadow Minister for Health and Social Care, Lord Prem Sikka, a staunch campaigner for pensioners' rights and fiercely against fuel poverty, Tom Selby, a pensions expert, writer and head of retirement policy at AJ Bell, and Morgan Vine, head of policy and influencing at Independent Age, a charity which researches and champions campaigns on older people's issues. I would just like to say that we did invite Gillian Keegan, who is the Minister of State for Health and Care. We have yet to receive any response from her office. So just so that you know that we do keep trying. Before we start properly, I'd like to introduce Jonathan Seyffer, who will be managing the webinar, and he will explain today's format. So, Jonathan.
Good morning. I'm Jonathan Seyffer, the NPC National Administration and Information Manager and your webinar host for today. There's not too much in terms of housekeeping. We will have Jan doing a further introduction, followed by our speakers and some questions. So if you do have any questions that you'd like to put to the panelists, please use the Q&A function that you should be able to see at the bottom of your screens. We've received a number of questions already. So if we don't get round to yours, apologies, but we will try and collate them and get answers for you if possible. So I'll hand back to Jan and she'll continue on with the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, I mean, it's no secret that our oldest and poorest are facing real financial hardship this winter. Older people's rights and the quality of life have steadily eroded over the years, with their income falling in real terms against rising prices. A fifth of all pensioners, more than 2 million, live in poverty, with the highest proportion being amongst the oldest and women. Many NPC members are still reeling from a pandemic, which hit our generation hardest, say they feel under attack from a range of poor government policy decisions, which seriously undermine our income, entitlements and care. But this April, they face a perfect storm that will leave them even more unable to buy food or heat their home, which is a real threat to life for the vulnerable. Days after the government announced last autumn that they were suspending the triple lock, which should have safeguarded the 2022 state pension rise, the Bank of England announced a record 5.1% rise in inflation. Yet this April, pensioners will just get 3.1% increase in their pensions. In April, pensioners and those on low income who are already afraid to turn on the heating will see the government's energy price cap coming off, which means energy firms will be free to set their rates, potentially pushing the average pensioner's bill up by more than £400 a year. Remember that many older people live in substandard, poorly heated and insulated homes that cost a fortune to heat. The winter fuel allowance has remained frozen since 2010, whilst energy prices have been allowed to rise. At its inception, it would pay for about 1/3 of your bill, but today it barely covers an eighth. Appeals to government by organisations such as NPC and Age UK to act to avert this looming disaster have so far fallen on deaf ears. Response from government that has already seen our entitlements such as a free TV licence for over 75s disappear, with the likelihood that everything from free bus passes to prescriptions for many pensioners set to follow suit. All of these damaging decisions affecting the income and outgoings of pensioners have taken at different times by different government departments with no thought as to the consequences. Excuse me. Add to this the crisis in health and social care, which sees many older people waiting longer for treatment and operations, or having to sell their homes to pay for their care. And you can understand why we feel under attack from all sides. Pension credit does not match the scale of the problem facing older people, with many finding small occupational pensions taking them just slightly over the limit. The government and business is keen to move all services online, but pensioners who can hardly afford food or heating can hardly afford expensive broadband. And a year ago today, the NPC launched our Connections for All campaign to help get more older people online. We will build upon this in later events, but finding the money for expensive broadband will no doubt be further down the list of essentials for many older people, leaving them even more detached from society and essential help that they need. We believe it is time for more joined-up thinking and policy decisions to improve the lives of our older people who have worked and paid taxes all their lives. And today is not just about the pensioners that we are in retirement. It is also about the future pensioners who will feel the impact of everything that happens to us today. So today we invite our panel to explain the impact of all these decisions on older people and what should be done to improve things for the better. We need to start with a dedicated commissioner for older people to fight for our rights, as they have in Wales and Northern Ireland. I'm delighted now to introduce our first speaker, the Shadow Minister for Health and Care, Karen Smith, MP. Karen, thank you for being with us today. I much appreciate the time that you give to us. So please tell us what the crisis in care and multiple pressures on pensioners are. Thank you very much.
Jan, thank you for that. And really, thank you for inviting me to speak this morning. I'm fairly recent to this role as Labour's spokesperson on social care, but I have a background in health and care, being a manager for the NHS for a number of years. And I think, just picking up on one of your points there, I am that next generation and also become a overnight carer and responsible in the terrible situation many older people have found themselves in the pandemic, with a very independent mid-90s mother and mother-in-law living successfully and independently, really taken down badly by the pandemic. So this is very personal to me too. And I said in Parliament, if we don't get this right for now, I'm really worried that we won't get it right for the next generation of those of us who are in our 50s who currently find ourselves part of the terrible situation that is social care. So it's a real pleasure to be here. And I've been asked to talk about the horrendous pressure on older people and my view about the problems and how Labour would tackle them. So I've asked to speak for about 10 minutes and then take some questions. So at the heart of this issue, we have a welfare state born in the 1940s, based on the life expectancy of the 1940s, not fit for purpose in the 2020s, when many people live happily so much longer than they did in the 1940s. Never part of the post-war settlement like the NHS and other parts of the welfare state, the assumption being that families, and particularly women in those families, would be able to cope, and if they couldn't cope, there would be carers to come in to support or residential care available for people. And overarching all of that really is the fact that nobody really wants to think themselves as getting older or in need of care due to ill health or disability. And politics itself is very short term, very of the now, and thinking in long-term horizons is a difficult thing to do. So we find ourselves really in the last decade having had an awful lot of debate, and I'll come on to some of the plans, but not any action to resolve the immediate problems that people face. And I want to be really clear that when Keir Starmer talks about his contract with the British people, about wanting to be the Prime Minister governing a country in which we are proud to grow up in and proud to grow old in, of Labour being the party of security, prosperity and respect, that is absolutely fundamental to our commitment around social care. So firstly, the problem, lack of government planning and investment. Many people here will have heard of the Dilnot report and heard of many initiatives over the last 10 years. And I'm not going to talk about them in detail because I think we need to look forward. But those proposals in 2011 recommended a future for social care and introduced this notion on a cap of care costs to provide some security to families. Between 2012 and 2015, the coalition government, if we can remember back that far, did do an awful lot of work and thinking around how that might be implemented. And they did put forward legislation in 2014 around something's called the Care Act. And that's something that we will be hearing more of in the next few months because that legislation still exists. But rather cruelly, after the 2015 election, which is when I became a member of Parliament, I remember this really well, having agreed to the Care Act and provided some sort of certainty to local councils and to people about what needed to happen, they in July 2015 postponed those parts of the Care Act that would have given some security. And they said that they would revisit it in April 2020. Now, it's been a difficult few years, but if people remember, we were supposed to have a 5-year Parliament. So in July 2015, when they said that, and so they'd come back to it in April 2020, that was the lifetime of a Parliament, and it was going to be just before the next general election. So I think that was its first really cruel blow on making progress. But then, of course, we had the 2017 election, which Theresa May brought forward more proposals, which were not taken forward. And then in 2019, yet another general election that we weren't perhaps expecting, whereby Prime Minister Johnson said that he would be fixing social care once and for all. But during this same time, when we were having these debates and some legislation, local authorities who provide most of the care and support have had their budgets cut by £8 billion in real terms. And most of that is from social care. Now, that means it's harder, and many people listening into this will know, it's so much harder to get basic support to allow people to live an independent life at home, putting more and more pressure also on budgets and contracts, which ultimately lead to very poor wages and terms and conditions for staff. So we have a decade of commitment made by the government, which are yet to be delivered, coupled with severe cuts to the service. And now we suddenly have a new 10-year vision and a tax rise. I just mentioned in passing, though, it's really important. We're also expecting a dementia strategy and more social care reforms in more white paper and some legislation currently in the House of Lords. But I'm happy to take questions on that, but I won't divert onto that at the moment. So what was our response as a Labour Party? At the time of the Dilnot proposals on the care cap back at the beginning of the decade, my colleague Liz Kendall did say that Dilnot is a small step forward for some people who need residential care, but it won't help the thousands of people with modest homes or those elderly and disabled people facing the desperate daily struggle to get the care and support they need right now. And essentially, that situation has got worse and worse as the decade has proceeded. So the Tories have a new plan. I have a document here with me. I don't know if people can see this. It's called People, I'm sorry, Julian's not here to talk about it, but People at the Heart of Care, which I think in its ambition, most of which the sector and experts don't disagree with, but will the proposals work and are they fair? And those are our tests. Now, social care is not fixed. and it's not fixed by these proposals. Our belief is that we absolutely have to transform support for old and disabled people to make this country the best place to grow old in. There is very little about workforce, a long-term strategy to recruit people, to meet the growing demand, and to pay and train people as professionals and give them the respect of work that they need. The new health and care levy goes firstly to the health service and then supposedly back into social care, but there is no real plan to make that happen. On the cap itself, the social care cap, the costs are higher than were ever anticipated and disproportionately impact people with lower levels of wealth, particularly housing, and help really relatively few people. And finally, the government proposals don't increase access to care, leaving thousands and thousands of people with unmet care needs, which are expected to be picked up by family and by friends. Now, our plan, because I realise that people say, well, what would you do differently? Now, I think we have a good record in government of support for older people, and we might come back to that, but it is a long time since we were in government. But our plan, based on 5 key proposals to transform support for older and disabled people. Firstly, to widen that access to basic services and support in the home that we know people need in order to fulfill an independent life as they get older or if they have an illness or disability. We would shift the focus to support prevention and early intervention with the principle of home first. Now that recognises that home might be a care home or residential home, but essentially we want to support people in the place they call home, in the communities they know and love, close to family and friends. Thirdly, we want to make sure that disabled people have an independent and fulfilling life, guaranteeing working age adults choice and control over the support they get, and that their views also drive the system. Fourthly, we do need a better deal for care workers. Before the pandemic, there were over 110,000 vacancies, and many people, I'm sure, listening to that will have experienced care packages collapsing at the last minute, not being able to get the care that people are often assessed to get. We need to make sure that people not only have the pay and terms and conditions, but also that training is there and that care is recognised as a good career to enter. And finally, we need to have a much better partnership with families so that people don't put their own livelihoods and incomes and health at risk for looking after the people that we love. We already have 11 million unpaid family carers that don't have the information, advice and support they need. We know far more people have become overnight carers during the pandemic. We also know that over 1 million people, mainly women in their 50s, have left the workforce more generally. And we need to find out the details of that. But I think most people on this call will know that those people have left the workforce because of their needs to support and love and care for wider members of their family. So I know people on this call are interested in the here and now, and it's been a terrible 2 years, isn't it? Because what those feelings of insecurity and uncertainty have been totally exacerbated by the pandemic and has transformed, as I know it has in my own family, independent lives into a really difficult situation and worse feelings of isolation for many. We know that care packages are collapsing, family and friends are doing far more, and everyone is exhausted. But we have to learn from the last 2 years and bring forward plans much more urgently. I'd just finally like to add some more general points, which Jan has actually picked up on, about the fact that we know 1/5 of pensioners are living in poverty, and people, 1 million householders, we estimate, are missing out on pension credit. We support actions to protect pensioners, particularly from scams, which we know is worse at home, and people who are finding themselves better able to meet and greet people on platforms like this are more targeted by scams, and we have tried to do much more about that in legislation as well. Pensioners particularly like other consumers, but because your income generally is fairly well fixed, are facing those rising inflation and food shortages and the energy cap. And in fact, today in Parliament, we are bringing forward yet again more proposals to meet the cost of inflation and energy prices that the government still doesn't want to take action on. But this does, of course, affect older people with that static income particularly hard. But generally, in what is the century of ageing, everyone should be able to look forward to getting older with confidence and not fear. That's for the current generation and the people that come behind. That contract with the government is absolutely key to a decent, good welfare service. And we as a Labour Party do stand ready to work with people such as yourselves to make that happen. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you, Karen. That's really interesting. It actually chimes with a lot of the questions that we have got for you. So we'll take 3 and see where we get to and see what else is there. The NPC has a policy for a national care service. It's called Goodbye Cinderella, a new settlement for care. I think your predecessor might have had a copy. We can send you one to Karen. And basically, it is about putting people at the heart of care, giving each individual the right to choose, which is not what fixing Care for Good via Mr. Johnson is about. It's a lot of missed opportunities, and we have sent a critique of that to be part of the House of Lords, looking at amendments for the NHS Reform and Social Care Bill. Marie Harrison, who's from Merseyside Pensioners Association, a crossover Merseyside, she was part of that policy. And she was saying that she's asking if our calls for the funding to be paid from general taxation, which is not to say that we would increase taxes or national insurance, it's more about taking and redistributing the wealth. So capital gains tax should be a level with income tax. They're far apart, one above the other. And, you know, making more savings on private pensions where people get a huge £10 billion kickback before they retire. So what she's asking is, would you support that? And do you support the concept of a publicly funded, publicly accountable care system? So that's number one. Number 2 is from Violet. Now, Violet has really kind of put the marker on where we stand with the NHS and social care. What she's saying is that both were established at a time when the market was not the economy policy. Yeah. So this is the problem. How would you think the present situation can be adapted to overcome the problems which this economic policy is causing in a vital scheme in regard to everyone's lives? So it's about the privatisation of the social care element. It's always had a private element, but over 85% of care is now delivered by the private sector, simply because local authorities have had their budgets severely cut and cannot do anything about that. And then we come to another question around how difficult it is to contact your GP. And this is where the digital exclusion issue comes in. We find that a lot of people are using the app to book their appointments online. So people like us who have to hang on the telephone, and it costs us a bit of money to do so, find when we get eventually to the receptionist that all the appointments for that day are gone. So it's really the first step of even accessing a GP appointment to talk about your health is a minefield. So is there something that we can do about digital exclusion as well? So I'll leave you those 3, Karen.
Thank you. And I think if I roll the first two into each other, so I mean, I think we need a much more accountable health service as well, which is much more locally accountable, as well as a care system. And I think when we're asking people to pay more as part of however that is eventually decided on income tax or on wealth or whatever model comes forward, our test is obviously it has to be fair, and it has to be fair across the generations. But however that is funded, we know that the health and care system will cost a greater proportion of the financial cake over the next few years because people are happily living longer and will require more support to do so. Then we have to make sure that the taxpayer, both current and previous and future, understand what that's for, so that we bring people with us on that journey. So when we increased taxes in the Labour government, for those of us who can remember, we were very clear on our sort of review of what's the best funding for the health service at the time, what was the need, and how we were going to pay for it. And you have to bring people, the wider public, with you on that journey. And I'm very much in favour of being clear and transparent about that. And I know that's how Rachel Reeves, our Shadow Chancellor, will appreciate. And I think the Conservatives are getting themselves into a particular problem at the moment, because not only have they put this particular version of a tax rise on people, which isn't fair, it also doesn't do the job. And they haven't said what the money will fund, how it will make things better. They haven't matched up the money they've raised with the plan that they've said they want to do. And I think that is frustrating everybody, including backbench Conservatives. So we absolutely do need to fund it better and make that accountable. There will always be a role for the private sector. That there is in the health service, and there always has been. I think what we're seeing across the country, and it is particularly of Labour councils, but I'm hoping to meet with councillors across the cross-party local government association as well, of good practice in some places, and I think Bristol is doing a good job in my city of bringing back as much as possible into the public sector the contracts with care providers, and working with care providers using things like ethical charters to make sure people are paid properly, that the terms and conditions are as good as they can be, and working with people who are willing to work with them and work inside our communities. I was talking to colleagues in Birmingham the other day, and I'm sure we might have people from Birmingham, Bristol on the call that will say it's not working that well. And believe me, as a member of Parliament, I know when those care packages collapse, because that's when I get the phone calls and emails. But there are councils that are insourcing, bringing that care back, trying to contract with people in a more ethical and fair way, and we absolutely want to raise the example of those councils, and share that good practice. And ultimately, the people who work in the system, provide the system, are all spending their income in the local economy. So it is good for the local economy to pay people and give them secure jobs and make the sector attractive. On the sort of which doesn't affect as many people, but the residential and care homes themselves, which obviously, and we've seen some fantastic journalistic examples of these, the ownership model around some of those providers, not all of them, but some of them, clearly where profit is being made somewhere in the chain and perhaps not taxed properly, is a concern. But I really think the way that we reduce dependency over time on care homes is by this home first principle that I alluded to. Certainly, all the people I speak to and my own experience of family, people do want to be independent and as much as possible in their own home, or a home that is fit for whatever needs we need in the future. Excuse the bell. I'm going to. That's just to prove that I'm here in Parliament, and that's the bell for the beginning of the day. Sorry if that came to people's ears a bit badly. There'll be another one in 2 minutes, and I'll mute so you don't hear it. Although it does mean that I'm live here in Parliament. Sorry, just lost my train of thought about the reliance on those public sector bodies. By home first, yes, just to put in, housing is absolutely crucial. Now, I'm sure many people on this call will certainly be like in my family. If there was a suitable on the estate home that one could transfer from the family home into a more suitable but local, still in the place that people have used to be in their community, beside shops, beside churches, beside schools, remembering perhaps where you took your own children to school, or whatever that is for your community or near your family. It's got to be a housing that is suitable for whatever needs people have when they're older. And of course, they're very varied. So key to the future, and I didn't have time to do it there, is decent housing, and housing that is built now, that is fit for people to move on to at a time of their choosing. That in turn reduces that reliance of going into a care or residential setting. Some people are doing some very interesting work around housing and very sheltered housing, and that's absolutely key and core part of our proposal. And that in turn reduces the reliance on those large multinational chains of private sector providers. The GP access is a really interesting one. Of my jobs 10 years ago in the health service was trying to get GPs and the public to use the telephone and videos more to help people not have to go into a GP service. So I found a whole debate around access to a GP via the telephone, via video calls, really fascinating, because it does suit some people. But I absolutely get, particularly if you're on your own, being able to call and make that appointment and have the reassurance that your GP understands what your healthcare needs are, that you can get back the information you might need to find out where on earth you are in the waiting list, or if you're waiting for an appointment, or if you're worried about something, is absolutely crucial. And I think, again, it varies across the country. I know in my own patch, they have moved back to more face-to-face appointments. It is safer to come into the surgery. They are prioritising people better. But I'm interested in other people's calls. There are certainly, I know, where actually the service, even at consultant level and in hospitals, they have got better in the pandemic in a lot of areas about also contacting individuals and their families about what on earth's going on with their care. So I think we do need to hold on to some of the good stuff about certainly, I'm sure people have had this experience. You're in hospital, or you've gone into hospital and you're on a waiting list. You never get to talk to the consultant or a junior doctor about what's really going on. But in many cases, because people couldn't visit or come in, which is awful, which is truly awful experience. There you go. There we go. People working in the system have got better at thinking about, well, I can phone this family, I can phone this individual back out. If that person then has got access to, a phone that's accessible and so on. So it's very varied. I don't think we should just, we can't move back to where we were. I think we need to learn some good lessons about how people have been able to communicate in families. But not everyone can use Zoom or a telephone call. Absolutely. I think digital exclusion has to be absolutely up there, but let's try and learn some good lessons. And certainly I know in my area, it's got better about face-to-face appointments, but it is difficult. It's really difficult.
Thank you, Karen. Two more questions. You talk a lot about family carers, and there's a question from David Lomakin. He says, with families supporting senior members of the family with care time and finance, these members of the family will be the next senior citizens, but help and financial support would already have been exhausted. So the system at present should be looking further into protection and support beyond this generation. And I think that's absolutely correct. And the last question for you. The NPC also has a policy for a commissioner for older people in England with the same legal standing and backed by legislation to protect older people in England as they have in Wales and Northern Ireland. This organisation particularly has great difficulty with the current government in getting ourselves heard and represented, and we find that there's not really a voice in Parliament for older people. So would the Labour Party support a commissioner for older people in England?
So let me be completely honest, and I don't know the answer to that question at the moment. I'm not sure if my colleagues, it's not my area directly, but I'm not entirely sure. So I'll do that unusual thing for a politician and say, I don't know what our commitment is on that particular issue at the moment, but I'm very happy to check with my colleagues on that. But I think the principle, and I'm also meeting with colleagues in Scotland and Wales. I'm vice chair of something called the British Irish Parliamentary Assembly, whereby we work across Scotland, Wales, Ireland and Northern Ireland, to particularly on issues like this, where we share so much of the same population and the history, to learn the lessons. And I think devolution is a good thing generally, but we should, and that absolutely something I'm committed to doing in this role, learn what's going on in Scotland and Wales particularly, and take the good and learn from how things are progressing. And that's on all aspects of things they're doing at the moment. And that's something I'll take away. Absolutely, Jan, I'm happy to get back to you on that one more formally so you can share it with members. So apologies for that. But I think the general principle that there is somebody across government, which is the source of your very excellent morning here today, looking at how do these issues impact people more broadly, because people don't live, do they, in departments of government? People live in their lives, and you're quite right to highlight how all these different things impact, and how do you talk to one person about some of these things. So in principle, I think that sounds like an excellent plan, and I will look at how it's working in England and Scotland and how that helps, and come back to you more formally on that. And I think I said in my opening comments, I don't mind sharing, I'm 57, and I said in Parliament when I spoke, when the government brought forward its proposals in September, that they weren't urgent enough, they weren't soon enough, that they weren't enough to help my mother-in-law in their mid to late 80s. I worry that they're not going to be enough to help me. And then I also think, what on earth is going to do to help my children in their late teens and 20s? So I absolutely get that. And that's why in my opening comments, this short-term issue of politics, which we're all dealing with, and we're all running around wondering, who's going to which party and how many parties they were and so on, whilst we were all looking after our loved ones and isolating and obeying the rules. But beyond all of that, the longer term. So, I want to work constructively with the government and Gillian Keegan on the longer term. I want them to bring forward those proposals much more urgently for now, particularly after the pandemic, when people have suffered so much, and the burden, and nobody wants to ask their 50, 60-year-old sons and daughters to come and help them, to give up work, to look after them. People have led an independent life with choice and dignity up until this stage, and that's how they should continue. So they need to bring it forward much more urgently. But absolutely, my real fear is, and of course you plan and you think about it, is, well, if they don't do it now, that 20 years might be another conversation, and we need to make sure that doesn't happen, particularly after the pandemic.
Thank you, Karen. I know you've got to leave at 12, but we might have some more questions. So if you don't mind, if we get more questions, and the questions we've not been able to give you, we will contact you. And
I'll chat through the chat. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Karen. We now move to Tom Selby, who's Head of Retirement Policy at AJ Bell. And we've asked him to come here and talk to us about the real cost of the triple lock suspension for pensioners. So thank you, Tom, for being with us, and off you go.
Hi, Jan. Thanks very much for inviting me to speak. I've got a short presentation, so let me just share my screen. Hopefully this will work without a hitch. Okay, let me know if you can't see that, but hopefully you can. So yeah, as Jan mentioned, my name's Tom Selby. I'm Head of Retirement Policy at AJ Bell. A pleasure to speak at this debate today and this action day, which I think is incredibly important. I think for older people, having dignity is the absolute bare minimum that should be expected, frankly, and it's down to policymakers and various other actors in the financial service industry and elsewhere to ensure that is the case. As Jan mentioned, today I'm going to be looking at what is quite a challenging time for savers, investors and retirees. And as part of that, I'll specifically be focusing my presentation on the implications of the decision to axe the state pension triple lock, and also the rising cost of living and the cost of living crisis that we've all heard debated in recent weeks and months. Just a quick risk warning that I have to put up as part of any presentation. I'll just leave that up for a few seconds. The main point there being that everything I say today is meant to be information and guidance rather than regulated financial advice. AJ Bell doesn't offer advice. If you would like advice, then you need to speak to a suitably qualified financial advisor. Now that's the boring bit over with. So the things that I'm going to talk about today, as I mentioned, the state pension and what you get, the impact of the decision to suspend the state pension triple lock, rising prices and how that's going to affect savers and retirees. And then I will have a quick moment on the state pension age, and then happy to take any questions you may have. Now, the UK state pension system isn't as simple as you might hope it would be. So it's essentially divided into pre and post 2016 frameworks. So the full flat rate state pension for post 2016, post April 2016 retirees pays a maximum of just shy of £180 a week. So just over £9,300 a year in 2021-22. You need to have a 35-year national insurance record in order to receive that full amount, and you need a 10-year NI record to receive anything at all. That part of the state pension payment rises in line with the triple lock, or at least it's supposed to, and that was the Conservative manifesto commitment, of course. And that triple lock means that the state pension should rise in line with the highest of average earnings, inflation, or 2.5%. However, as I mentioned at the start, the UK state pension system isn't simple. And in fact, even if you're reaching state pension age after April 2016, you're not guaranteed to get that full flat rate amount, partly because you may not have the full national insurance record that you need, and partly because if you've built up rights under the old system, then those rights under the old system will be brought forward into the new system. So what happens is you have a foundation amount calculated under the new system. So you may get more or less than a full flat rate amount. And that complexity, unfortunately, will stay in the state pension system for a number of decades, as lots of people who built up rights pre-2016 are going to keep filtering through. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people on the call who have already reached state pension age as well. If you reach state pension age before April 2016, then you'll have had your entitlements built up under the old system. Again, quite complicated. You've got the basic element, which is just over 137 quid a week in 2021-22. And then there are earnings related elements on top of that, which will be different for different people depending on their earnings and employment records. Important to note that it's just the flat rate state pension and the basic rate state pension that rise in line with the triple lock. Those other earnings related elements only rise in line with CPI inflation, which has been a source of some controversy over the years. I think it's something that's quite poorly understood by lots of people. Now, getting on to the meat of the presentation, the state pension triple lock and the decision to suspend it. So I'm sure, as you all know, and as Jan mentioned, that the government confirmed that the average earnings element of the state pension triple lock will be suspended from April this year. That was a Conservative manifesto commitment that has been breached. It came in response to a significant spike in average earnings in the 3 months to July of 2021. So just to explain the mechanics, the triple lock historically has been applied using the average earnings figure for the 3 months to July, the inflation figure for September. If either of those two things are below 2.5%, then that 2.5% underpin kicks in. Now, the government wasn't prepared for, and the state pension triple lock wasn't really designed for a world where average earnings go up by 8.3%. That's clearly a post-pandemic spike. So we saw everyone going into lockdown, we saw average earnings drop, and then we've seen a spike in average earnings as thankfully we've all been able to slowly come out of lockdown and the economy's got going again. In terms of the fiscal context, so that one of the things that the Treasury will have been having to consider, of course, is the immediate cost of retaining the triple lock. Just to give you an idea of that, every 1 percentage point increase in state pension spending costs just shy of £1 billion. So if you look at the difference of that 8.3% rise in the state pension versus the 3.1% rise that's going to come in as a result of the removal of the earnings element and the use of September inflation, you're going to be talking about a £5 billion annual saving for the government. And that's a saving that they'll be making over and over again by cutting people's state pensions, or by increasing people's state pensions by less than would have previously been planned. What that all means, of course, is that the state pension will be rising next year, but by less than would have been implied if the triple lock had stayed in place. So the flat rate state pension, the full flat rate state pension going up by £5.55, and the basic state pension increasing by £4.25 per week. Now, in terms of the impact of that decision, I discussed this briefly with Jan before we came on the call. It is important to note that it's not just current retirees who are affected by the decision to remove the earnings element of the triple lock. It's future retirees as well, because every increase in the state pension will be applied to a lower figure. So to just see that impact, I've looked at the difference between what the state pension is going to be through a 3.1% increase and what the state pension would have been if you increased it by 8.3% in line with average earnings, as the triple lock would have demanded had the earnings element not been removed. So the basic state pension would have been increasing to £149 per week in April rather than £141.85. And the full flat rate state pension would have been increasing to £194.50 per week rather than £185.15. So that's a significant amount of money when you look at it over the course of the years. So around £370 lost for those who are in receipt of this basic state pension, around £486 lost to those in receipt of the full flat rate state pension. And of course, as I mentioned, that impact will be felt over time, because each increase that's applied from next year onwards will be to a figure that's lower than it would otherwise have been had the triple lock remained in place. So if you look at that over the course of 5 years, if you think about someone in receipt of the flat rate state pension, in total income, if the state pension increased by 5% each year after this year's increase, they'd have been taking home just shy of £56,000 in total state pension income. That because of the decision to axe the state pension triple lock, they'll actually be taking home over that 5-year period, if the state pension increases by 5% each year, which doesn't seem outlandish, frankly, given where inflation is at the moment, they'll be receiving around £53,000. So you're talking about a £2,500 hit to people's incomes over 5 years. And of course, if you think about how long people spend in retirement, that hit could be significantly more when you talk about 15, 20, 25, or even 30 years in receipt of the state pension. Now, of course, that decision on the triple lock is happening at a time when inflation is running rampant in the UK economy. So that this graph just shows what's happened to CPI inflation over a 12-month period. Quite staggering, really, to see that on a chart, given that over the last 10 years or so, inflation has been relatively benign. It's been something that most people generally haven't had to worry about in the way that they have had to worry about in the past. We're now at the point in time where CPI inflation stands at 5.4%, the highest level since that measure of inflation was introduced in 1997. In terms of the context of that, so there's quite often debate around the way that different people experience inflation. I think that's an incredibly important debate, and one that Jack Monroe, the poverty campaign, has done some excellent work on, particularly in recent weeks. That's been given a significant amount of publicity. These figures from the ONS show the difference in the way that inflation is experienced by retired versus non-retired households. Now, since 2010, the way that people have experienced inflation on average has been the same, whether they've been retired or non-retired. Now, the caveat that needs to come with that is that people at the very bottom end of the income spectrum, and that's something that the ONS itself has acknowledged and something that Jack Monroe has campaigned on as well, can experience inflation at much higher rates than that. So if you look at people in the first decile of the income spectrum, so people who are at the very poorest end, quite often they can suffer significantly higher levels of inflation, particularly because they're having to heat their homes, and the cost of heating their homes will be a bigger proportion of their overall spending in the year. So again, that's something that I'll need to caveat this slide with as well. So comparing low income and high income inflation, on average, low income and high income households have experienced similar inflation since 2014. But again, that needs to be held with the caveat that when they say low income in this graph, so this is an ONS graph, and they're talking about the second decile of people. So it's people in the bottom 20% of income households versus people in the top 20% of income households. If you actually break that down to the very lowest earners, you'll find that those very low earners can experience extremely high inflation. And of course, these are just average figures as well. So the amount of inflation that different households will experience will vary depending on what they spend their money on, how much they heat their home, whether they're living in more older, poorly insulated homes, which are more difficult to heat. There'll be all sorts of factors that go into people's individual experiences. So that's just to give a little bit of context in terms of the significant inflation challenge that savers and retirees are going to be experiencing at the moment. Now, as Jan mentioned earlier, the state pension is going to rise by just over 3% in April. But the reality is that the inflation that people are experiencing and the prices that people are having to pay for goods and services are going up by more than that. So that state pension increase for a lot of people is going to feel like quite a substantial state pension cut, and that's coming, of course, at a time when the amount of people having to spend on things is going up significantly. I thought it'd be worth bringing in different kinds of retirement income and different kinds of savings as well, and the impact that inflation has on those. So if you think of people in receipt of a level annuity, so that's a retirement income bought from an insurer that doesn't increase in line with inflation, they tend to be the types of annuities that people buy. So the sales of those annuities outstrip sales of inflation-linked annuities by about 4 to 1. So there'll be lots of people, and potentially some people on this call, who are in receipt of those types of retirement income. If inflation runs at 2% a year, then in 5 years' time, the real value of that income will drop by almost £1,000. If you increase inflation by 2 percentage points to 4% a year, then you can see that in 5 years' time, the impact of that is substantial, and that money will only stretch to £8,000. Similar problems for anyone who's got savings in cash or cash-like investments. If inflation runs high for a significant period of time, then that's going to have a real serious impact on how far your money stretches. One way to combat that is to take some investment risk and invest in stocks and shares. That if you're thinking about going down this route, you need to think about your personal circumstances, the risk that you're comfortable taking, and of course, understand, as we saw in 2020, that the value of stocks and shares can very much go down as well as up, particularly in the short term. Now, finally, I won't linger on this too much, but I'm happy to take any questions you may have on it. I think an important part of this debate, so we've got the state pension triple lock being suspended, the earnings element being suspended, we've got rising inflation, and we've got a rising UK state pension age as well. So the current UK state pension age, 66 for both men and women. Of course, the state pension age was equalised between men and women controversially between 2010 and 2018. Under current legislation, the state pension age is going to increase again. So it's going to go up to 67 by 2028 and 68 potentially by 2039, depending on whether or not the government pushes ahead with previous plans to accelerate that increase to 68 by 7 years. There's some uncertainty over whether or not that will happen. So I'm sure many of you will be aware the government's initiated a review of the state pension age that will conclude in 2023. That's going to look at all sorts of elements that go into the state pension age. So looking at the latest life expectancy, data, in particular regional disparities. There are some quite shocking disparities in life expectancy when you look, for example, at people who were born in Blackpool versus people who were born in Westminster. I think the disparity in life expectancy is somewhere in the region of 10 years. It's something that hasn't been given enough airtime and enough debate, in my view, and hopefully is something that will be debated more as we move forward, because clearly, if the poorest in society and areas that have the lowest incomes have lower life expectancy, then that has implications for the fairness of the state pension system as well as other parts of the system as well. So yeah, that's a quick summary of everything I've talked about. Happy to take any questions you have. I appreciate it's a very difficult time for lots of people at the moment. People's income's been squeezed in various ways, and the government's decision on the state pension triple op for a lot of people will have been a difficult one to stomach, I suspect, particularly as it was in the manifesto.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, good few questions for you. Right. The future for people in their 30s and 50s now doesn't look that good, does it, in terms of the impact of the losses that you've shown? And I hope people understand that the triple lock, it's something that accrues over time. So every time you get a triple lock increase, the next year's increase is on that total. So when you lose the triple lock, you don't get that accrued function on your pension. And we all know that not everybody gets a full pension. And I've already said today, the worst affected in this scenario are over 85s and women. And women have a particular lifestyle that the pension system has never taken into account over time. The pension system as it is, I don't know if you agree, is really not fit for purpose for the modern society, the way that we live our lives. So I think I'd like to ask what we can do to encourage people who are in their 30s, who may be thinking that retirement is so far ahead they don't have to worry about it, and how we can engage with them. And I have a question from Janet Shapiro. It's not a question, it's really a comment and a question. And we fight this all the time. The basic state pension is often referred to as a benefit. It is not a benefit. We've paid for it. Paid for it all our working lives with whatever taxes we pay for and national insurance contributions. And we do actually know that the NI fund has been used, and probably still is being used, to support other funding that should come from taxation. So how do we argue with a non-listening government to A, say pensions is not a benefit, and B, the NI fund should be used for what it was constructed for and nothing else? And the last question I'm going to give you is, well, there's two questions actually. The 50s women who had their retirement age bumped up, was that really about equality? Do we know that that was really about equality? And again, on the equalities thing, the tackling the currently large 40.3% gender pension gap, and how we do work with the TUC, but we want to be able to look at a pension scheme that is equal for everybody. And our policy is to have a decent state pension for all, set above the level of poverty at 70% of the national living wage outside of London, plus the triple lock. And that goes to everybody, regardless of what you've paid. It's the only way. We think that every pensioner should be treated equally. So off you go, Tom.
Okay, some really good questions there. So So the first one, so is the UK state pension system fit for purpose, and what can younger people do to save for retirement? I'll pick up actually on the point around the state pension triple lock. One of my frustrations with that as a policy is that it feels like it's stripped away debate about what the state pension should be trying to achieve. I think that politicians have tended to use the triple lock as a kind of totem for doing right by older people, rather than having the debate that we should be having, which is how big should the state pension need to be in order to give people dignity and some comfort in retirement? Because the triple lock is a kind of tacit admission that the state isn't paying people enough in retirement, because it means that the real value of the state pension will go up whenever average earnings or inflation are low. But it's entirely at random. It's a slightly, I'm not trying to be controversial, but it's a slightly nonsensical way of increasing the state pension. My view has always been that if you think the state pension is too low, then say how big it should be, and then have a plan to get there that doesn't involve the triple lock at all, actually, and then reach that point, and then peg the state pension to average earnings and inflation, and you've reached a point where everybody has agreed that is the right level of the state pension. So personally, that's what I would like to see. And one of my big disappointments is I think that I think the triple lock has done an incredible job in lifting the state pension from where it was, but I think there are more sensible ways to do that. In terms of the broader state pension system, there are lots of problems. I agree with the broader state pension system. I would point to some of the complexity, some of the ways that tax works is incredibly difficult. It's very difficult for people to engage with. People in their 30s, I would say that if you're in your 30s, then you've got time on your side. Automatic enrolment is in place in the workplace. It means that you can get a matched contribution from your employer. You can also get the upfront boost of pension tax relief. You can invest over the long term, and hopefully you've got, people in their 30s might be looking until age 70 until they can retire. So that might be a difficult thing for some people to think of, but it also means they've got a decent period of time to build up a retirement fund. Of course, people have also got different priorities, different things they want to spend money on. I mean, we can't think of pensions in isolation. People in their 30s might be trying to get on the housing ladder as well. They might also have suffered income freezes, or even be facing job insecurity post-pandemic. And so for a lot of people, the idea of saving for retirement and balancing that with saving for a house and perhaps having kids and living an enjoyable life as you're young as well will be a tricky thing, but there are opportunities to do that. In terms of the basic state pension, I know this has been a debate that's gone on for a long time. My understanding is that the use of the term benefit came from the courts. Obviously there were the Back to 60 campaign were involved in a long-running legal battle to try to change the increase in the state pension age that were brought forward by the government. And my understanding, I may be wrong, but my understanding is that the reason that it's termed a benefit is because that's what the courts decided. And now people have every right to disagree with that ruling and every right to feel that what has happened in relation to that is not fair. And I think in particular the 2011 changes and the speed at which they were brought about were very difficult for a lot of people. And I think that for anyone who thought that they were going to receive the state pension at age 60 and having to wait until 66, I think some people had to wait an extra 6 years versus what they thought. That is an incredibly difficult thing, because you're talking about tens of thousands of pounds there potentially of income that you thought you were going to get that you're not going to get. The National Insurance Fund is a tricky one. So that the state pension is paid out of general taxation. The NI fund exists and goes up and down. It's extremely volatile. And actually, if you look at the projections of what's going to happen, I think it's the Government Actuaries Department who produce projections of what's going to happen to the NI fund. And I can't remember off the top of my head what the level is at the moment. But essentially, I think in the next 5 to 10 years, that fund is due to go down to zero, at which point taxes have to go up to pay for the state pension. I think sometimes using the NI fund isn't always the most helpful thing. I understand why it is used, but I think ultimately it's the state pension of current retirees is going to come from general taxation one way or another, and I think that's the lens that we need to frame it with. In terms of 50s women, it was equalities legislation that brought those changes forward. Clearly, when you increase the state pension age, there are other things that the government will receive from that. So by increasing the state pension age, clearly the Exchequer and the Chancellor gets more money, and so you could argue that was at least part of the reason that they did it. But I think it's probably worth noting that there were successive governments that brought forward legislation to increase to equalise the state pension ages of men and women. But I think there's a fair point to be made there that historically the state pension system hasn't served women very well, and so while equalisation may be fair in some senses, in other senses actually the system previously was so unfair that I'm not sure how you reconcile those two things. And on the gender pensions gap, it's a really important issue. There are probably some tweaks that can be made to the current system that will help address that problem. I think the biggest overall change that could be made is to ensure that men and women earn the same amount as in their working lives. If you close the gender pay gap, which has been closed to some extent, but I believe still stands at somewhere between 7 and 10%. When you continue to have a gap in the amount that people earn, clearly the amount that people save is going to be affected by that as well. I think there's things that can be done around shared parental leave, having better maternity rights and things like that. If we were able to do some of those things, then I think that the gender pension gap would close over time. But it's not going to, it does need focus, but it's not going to happen quickly, I don't think.
Thank you, Tom. One final question. We've got some more, but we'll send them to you.
Yeah, sure.
Because time is, as usual, marching on. The issue of pensioners who are carers.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, when you become a pensioner and you get your state pension, if you also become a carer, you tend to lose the carer's allowance. I mean, it's not a great deal. It's quite an insult to people who give their lives over to caring for another. Yeah. But they tend to lose either most of it or all of it, and then have to go looking for means-tested benefits. What would be the possibility of looking into how we can preserve the state pension in its entirety, and also the care allowance for those? I mean, we know of people in their 80s caring for someone in their 90s, but also caring for someone younger in the family, and they're sandwiched in the middle. And because they're a pensioner and their pension, the state pension, comes to more than the £67 odd a week they get as a carer, they get nothing else. And as we know, care costs. Yeah. So is there anything that we can do about that, do you think?
So if the Shadow Minister for Care felt she was able to say she doesn't know in answer to a question.
Well, I
think I should be able to say I don't know as well. So I'll be absolutely honest. I've not looked at the interaction between the state pension and the carers allowance, but it sounds from the face of it like something that should be looked at and addressed clearly, that anything that acts, that particularly post-pandemic, anything that discourages or is seen to discourage people from caring for elderly relatives or anyone in need is clearly not ideal. So not something that I've looked at, but I'd agree if that's an issue, it should be looked at.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, now we move to Lord Prem Seeker. Good morning, Lord Seeker. How are you?
I'm very well. Good morning to you and to everyone else. Thank you for
coming. Yeah, thank you for coming. Now, Lord Seeker, you're Professor of Accounting at the University of Sheffield, I understand, yeah?
I am Emeritus Professor, which means it is just a title. I'm retired Professor of Accounting at the University of Sheffield and University of Essex.
Oh, lovely. And you're here today, and I have to say thank you to you and your fellow Lords in the House of Lords for arguing so much for older people at this moment in time in terms of the triple lock, in terms of the NHS and care. You know, we're absolutely proud to have you here today. The energy price cap and pensioner poverty, this is what you are really, really here to talk to us about and very passionate about, I understand. So off you go.
Well, thank you. I mean, I wish we had been more successful in the Lords, but we basically had to engineer a rebellion, basically because when the triple lock legislation was going through the Commons, Labour Party officially abstained. And that kind of infuriated me and many others because it is really a vital issue. Now, if we're really going to look at the energy cap and many other related issues, essentially they're at the heart of the debates about the cost of living crisis, affordability, and our senior citizens are really at the harsh end of it. Senior citizens in this country are really condemned to poverty because our state pension, full state pension, not many get it, is only around 25% of average earnings, and nobody can really live on it. So earlier it was being argued that we should specify what we are aiming for. My view is very straightforward. We need a state pension which is not less than the living wage. That is what we actually need. So at the moment, as I said, the state pension is 25% of average earnings, and it is less than half the national minimum wage. It is the lowest in the OECD countries, where the average is 59%. And some of the countries which do better than us, just to give you some examples, are the Netherlands, Portugal, Italy, Austria, Spain, Denmark, France, Belgium, Finland, the Czech Republic, Sweden, Canada, Germany, the US, Norway, Switzerland, New Zealand, Australia, Ireland, Chile, Japan, Poland, Mexico, Hungary, South Korea, Luxembourg, Slovakia, just to mention a few. Many of these economies are much smaller than ours, yet they take better care of their senior citizens. The big reason for that is that the senior citizens' voice counts. In this country, senior citizens' voice does not really count for that much. They are actually neglected. So no political party really has a decent track record in this country of trying to take care of senior citizens. And senior citizens today are suffering because senior citizens in yesteryears put up with all kinds of injustices. So by fighting for better deal for today's senior citizens, we are also trying to help the future retirees, which is really an absolutely essential thing to do. Earlier, Tom mentioned that the full state pension is £9,339, but only 4 out of 10 retirees in this country receive it. The median weekly state pension for women in this country is between £150.25 and £174.47. And for men, it is £172.83. and £178.52. Now, nobody can live on that level of income, and that is really unacceptable. So 2.5 million pensioners receive less than £100 a week, and most of these are actually women. And so we need a decent state pension, as I said, mainly because we now are going through an era of wage freezes, low wages, the demise of the defined contribution or the final salary pension schemes. That means many people are not going to get a good occupational pension in the future. And even those who are paying little into auto-enrollment, they will get little out. So occupational pensions aren't going to be there to rescue the people in the future. So we do need a decent state pension now. The triple lock has been suspended whilst the National Insurance Fund account has a surplus of £42.5 billion. And the government said that it was suspending it because it could not afford it. And then the Treasury papers say that the cost of raising state pension in line with 8.3% increase in earnings would have been 5.4 billion. In my view, that 5.4 billion was perfectly affordable. So the scenario we find ourselves in now is that the state pension in April would rise by 3.1%, whilst the CPI may well be double that, which means there is a real decrease, real term cut in the value of the state pension. And as we all know, the winter fuel payments have been static since 2011. So the pensioners are really being hit absolutely hard. And there is no justification for this. Earlier, it was being mentioned about rising age expectancy. Well, that's applied to all the countries I reeled out earlier, yet they treat their senior citizens far better than we do. And each rise in state pension age basically results in transfer of wealth from the poor people to the rich people, because the poor people tend not to live very long. As was mentioned, around Blackpool, life expectancy is around 74, 75 years. And if you raise the state pension age to 68, and indeed Ian Duncan Smith's been talking about 75, well, that means nobody in that area would really receive the state pension because they're comparatively poor, and there are also other historical reasons. So that means the rich people will basically receive the benefit, and that is really unacceptable. To mediate the current crisis, we need an immediate rise of £500 in the state pension, plus a doubling of the winter fuel payment. I can explain where the money will come from in case anybody's worried about money. Of course, people will talk about money, even though the governments were happily able to hand £895 billion of quantitative easing to bankers without any question. And they were also able to rescue the banks as well. And they just spent, just written off 4.3 billion on COVID frauds, and 37 billions disappeared on the ill-fated test and trace program, but nevertheless, they will ask questions about money, and I'll come back to that in a moment. I also want to say a few words about social care. Social care at the moment, as we have, is not really acceptable. The fault lines go back to the formation of the NHS, when those people who were sick were brought under the NHS, and those who needed care were left under the local authority banner. So the result today is that if someone is suffering from cancer, well, they can have unlimited treatment and care under the NHS. But if somebody gets Parkinson's, motor neuron, dementia, they go under social care, and there is no free social care at all in this country. We need an integrated system, and the social care needs to be absolutely free at the point of delivery. A lot of people talk about means testing without telling us what the cost of means testing is. There are lots of benefits available to retirees, but how many people can mediate the bureaucratic maze to get any? And of course, means testing always gets in the way, and at the margin, wherever the threshold is, wherever the cutoff point is, those people who are caught, they always feel that they are harshly really treated. So how do we fund all this? People would say. Well, we can fund it without increasing the basic rate of income tax or the 40% rate of income tax or increasing national contributions for masses. Good example. For example, currently there is no national insurance charged on unearned income in this country at all. And we also treat unearned income in a preferential way. For example, capital gains are taxed at a lower rate than earned income. Earned income is taxed at the rate of 20 to 25 to 45%. Capital gains taxed from 10% to 28%. If we tax capital gains in exactly the same way as earned income, that raises extra £17 billion a year. If you charge national insurance on the same, it raises another 8 billion. Dividends. We again have a preferential regime for that, and no national insurance contributions are paid by the recipients of dividends. If we treated that the same way as earned income, that raises another 5 billion. Currently, the current rate of national insurance of 12% is levied on incomes up to £50,300, I think it is. Beyond that, it is 2%. So the more you earn, less you pay. It doesn't make any sense. It is not progressive. If we were to charge that 12% rate on all of the incomes, earned income that is, well, that would generate another £14 billion a year. Add to that ideas about wealth tax, financial transaction tax, sugar tax, salt tax, beefing up the inheritance tax, which is the most avoided tax in this country. Well, you have a potential for billions of pounds. HMRC currently fails to collect £35 billion a year in taxes. That is according to its own admission. My estimate is that that number is closer to 100 billion a year. We can have that debate on another day. So it is not a shortage of money, okay? It is simply that there is no political will to address deeper social problems. Social care has become a profit-making opportunity for private equity. I raised it in the House of Lords last week, referred to a company called HC1, which is basically siphoning off a vast amount of monies through intra-group transactions and transferring them to its affiliates in offshore tax havens. So we have to really bring back social care into public ownership and eliminate all this kind of profiteering and abuses. On social care, I wrote a paper, I sent it to Keir Starmer in July. I did not receive a reply. At the full meeting of the Parliamentary Labour Party, Karen may have been there, I don't know. I reminded Keir that he had not responded to my paper. And he said, okay, he'll look into this. I then heard from his secretary to saying, can I resend it? I did. I still haven't heard. So I don't know what the Labour policy is, what they intend to do. But all I'm just saying is there are proposals on the table. And, so in a few minutes that I have had, I can only give you a broad picture. Of course, there are lots of nitty-gritty details, and I'd be very glad to field them. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Speaker. In terms of the energy price cap, what kind of issues are there do you think there are for, not just for pensioners, but for those families on really low income? And I would like just to take this opportunity before you answer that to say that the NPC is holding a demonstration on the 7th of February at 11 o'clock at Downing Street. I'm sure they won't let us outside the door of number 10, but we'll be probably behind the railings. So 11 o'clock, Downing Street on the 7th of February, which is the day when Ofgem will be looking at another price cap rise. So just very quickly, Lord Seeker, we're running out of time. So if you could answer the one.
I'll join you if I can on that day. But a lot of people have talked about getting rid of the VAT, which would help. Green levies to be funded through general taxation rather than directly from consumers. That would help. I really think we also need to bring energy companies into public ownership. We need to increase universal credit. Earlier I referred to why we need to increase state pension. There are many people on universal credit. They really need to be helped as well, and that needs to be increased. But it is not just poor households and pensioners. Lots of small businesses are suffering as well. And I get regular correspondence from those people saying, they are really struggling and they are going to go under this time. Sorry, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you very much. If you can hang around, we've got some more questions for you. But I need to move on now to our last speaker, which is, she's waited a long time, Morgan Vine, who is Head of Policy and Influencing at Independent Age. And they have just released their research findings on poverty in later life, which makes for interesting but very sad reading, I have to say. So Morgan, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
So much, Jan, and it's been really interesting to hear the other speakers. As Jan said, I work for the National Older People's Charity, Independent Age. We support people who are 65 and over and their friends and families to make sure that they're getting what they're entitled to and to improve their lives. For those of you who don't know, we have a free helpline. We have lots of information and advice available, whether that's by phone, on the website, paper-based booklets, and I'm happy to pop some links in the chats if any of your members want to order those or need them for their local groups, because I know you do great work around the country and I've talked to lots of your groups, and we're always happy to provide guides and things if that's helpful across a broad range of topics. As Jan said, we are really concerned about older people who are living on a low income, and we've been doing some work recently to sort of delve into that a bit more. I'm sure this will come as no shock to you, but I wanted to contextualise some of this. So through our advice line and with our community teams on the ground and through our campaign network, we hear from people regularly who are really struggling. They were struggling before the pandemic, and they are struggling even more now. To give you some examples of some of the things I've heard directly, people saying that they can't afford fresh fruit because they are worried it will go off. So they rely on tinned fruit and vegetables just to stop anything going off and that being a waste of money. One woman told me that she only boils her kettle once a day to save electricity. And I spoke to somebody else based in Scotland who told me that her home is really cold, as we've heard earlier. Cold homes and poorly insulated properties are a big problem. And she told me that she wears a hat when she goes to bed. And when I said there might be, benefits that you're entitled to, like there might be money out there that could help you, she just said, oh, I'm sure there are people worse off than me, and I wouldn't want to take the money from them. So there are huge problems in this country around older people really struggling and not getting what they're entitled to. And we wanted to do a bit of digging into that. In terms of the piece of work that we released a couple of weeks ago, so as I'm sure we all know, there are sadly too many people who live earlier parts of their life in poverty. And when they reach old age, they are still in poverty. They are still struggling to pay the bills, struggling with rent, etc. And we know that there are approaches that need to be taken across the life course, looking at child poverty, looking at adults who are working or in work or of working age who are living below the poverty line. We know that there needs to be interventions and solutions presented to those people to help them. But at Independent Age, what we wanted to do was look at, is there anything happening once people go past state pension age that is thrusting them below the poverty line? And is there anything that is helping them escape poverty during that period? Because our thinking is, if there is, then the government can target interventions at those groups in later life. They can't say, oh, everything has to happen before, if we know that there are things happening during that period. So we did this new piece of research, and we looked at people over a 10-year period. And some of the findings were really, really shocking, even to us, when we were expecting to see some things. We weren't expecting to sort of see the exact extent of what was happening. So to give you all an example, I'm sure you've all heard the figure, you know, there are 2 million older people living in poverty, and we've done analysis that's shown that number is on the rise. So we know that it's risen almost 5% since 2011, and it's at the highest it's ever been since 2006. So pensioner poverty is rising. That's undeniable. In terms of our new research, so we found out that 40% of all older people during a 9-year period that we looked at, 40% of older people spent at least 1 year below the poverty line. So we were really surprised by that. Nearly half of older people went below the poverty line during that period. We also found that 1 in 20 older people were longer term poor. And what that meant was, in the 9-year period that we looked at, they were in poverty, below the poverty line, for 7 to 9 years of that period. So they are having a really tough time for the majority of that period. We also found, and I'm sure this won't come as a surprise, that there are certain groups that are more likely to experience poverty and living on a low income. So our research, looking at that 10-year period, found that single people, as has been mentioned by other speakers, those who are living alone, are more likely. We also found that Black older people are more likely. 20% of them are more likely to go below the poverty line. And also older people who privately rent, whether that's private renting or social renting, if they're in a situation where they rent, they are more likely to live in poverty. So they're some of the, I was going to say highlights, lowlights of what the research found. The other thing that I thought was really important to share with all of you is we're going to be exploring this more. But the other main finding from our research was the biggest reason that pensioners dropped into poverty during later life, past their state pension age, was because they lost social benefit income. And the biggest reason that they exited poverty was because they received their social benefit income. So at our charity, we've been running a campaign for a couple of years, particularly on pension credit. And I know there have been people in the chat talking about pension credit. Pension credit is meant to be there for pensioners on a low income to top up their income. But the number of people who miss out is in the millions. The amount of money left, the last stats showed that about £1.5 billion was left over in the pot, entitled to these people that really, really need that money. And we've been calling on the government to increase the uptake, because the uptake figures are around 65%. So we know that nearly half of the older people who are entitled to that money don't receive it. And that's only one benefit. Of course, there are lots of other things that people could be entitled to, as other speakers have mentioned, you know, housing benefit, council tax reduction. There's lots out there that can help people, many of which actually pension credit can be a gateway to. But people just don't seem to be receiving this money. So we've been campaigning to try and increase the number of people receiving it. And there have been some positive steps forward, I would say small steps. So an awareness campaign, the DWP invested in an awareness campaign. They've done a communications review looking at how they promote pension credit and other benefits to people entitled to it. But our big problems are the government doesn't know who is missing out. They don't know where they live. They don't know why they are not receiving this money. So even if you thought, okay, looking at our new research, you could target people who are renting, for example, there are ways that you could find older renters and target them and let them know what they're entitled to, whether that be awareness campaigns, working with local councils. We think there's lots that could be done to improve the situation for older people. We also did a piece of research last year that showed as my example showed, we know that for people making these tough choices, it's often affecting their mental and physical health. I mean, we've spoken to people who aren't putting the heating on, but they're living with a heart condition, or they're living with serious arthritis. So they're becoming unable to walk because they've not put the heating on, or because they're not able to eat healthily and things like that. So we know there's a knock-on cost. And our new research that we produced last year showed the government that if they took that leftover money that doesn't currently get to the people eligible and entitled to it from pension credit, it's about 1.5 to 2 billion pounds. We proved that you would save 4 billion in NHS costs and social care costs, because often people are ending up in hospital as emergency admissions because they're not able to look after themselves and keep healthy. So we've done our best to make the financial case, but we absolutely want to make sure that, you know, as a charity and working with others like the NPC, we want to really raise this up the ranks and make sure that people are getting the money they're entitled to. And I think now more than ever, with the cost of living rise, it's absolutely imperative that people living on a low income are getting what they're entitled to, and we want to make sure that we're doing that. For people listening who haven't heard of us, all of our information and advice, if any of you need it, is available on our website. There's paper-based guides you can order as well, and we've got a free telephone line if you need any support. I'll also pop those details in the chat. But that's a quick overview of what we've done. I'm aware of time, so I wanted to keep it relatively succinct. But Jan, feel free to ask any questions, or if there's anything I can do to flesh anything out, please just say.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being so patient. I mean, these things do travel on. We like to give people the best experience we can on a webinar when we can't see each other face to face. I think it's absolutely brilliant around your financial suggestions, and we'd be very, very happy to work with you and support you to take that to the highest level. It's very, very important that if money is being left to go back to the Treasury when it's absolutely badly needed elsewhere, I'm sure we would all want to support that. So thank you for that suggestion. One of the things that I think we would be interested in, I mean, just to promote something else that you do, as an organisation, you also look at the emotional as well as the material effect on pensioners, and particularly on the pandemic issue. Do you think there's an epidemic of illness going to result from what we've gone through over the past 2 years? And what can we do to support people through that, either with yourselves or other people? And will that place an even bigger burden on health and social care?
Yeah, so at Independent Age, we cover a range of themes, and we try and support people at different points on their journey. And definitely something that's been coming through, as you say, Jan, particularly over the last 2 years, but also before that, has been people struggling with low mood, people feeling blue, people feeling anxious, and just not knowing what to do with that or where they can go for support. When you think also coupling alongside that, the number of bereavements that people of all ages have been dealing with over the last 2 years, often unexpected bereavements close together of people that you care about. And I'm sorry, I'll just say, obviously, I appreciate this could be triggering for some of the people watching this. So please do, if you need to step out or just take some time out while I'm speaking about this topic, obviously, please do that. But we know that people have been contacting us about bereavement and grieving. And we did some calculations just to try and show the extent of what people are going through. And we calculated that for the first year of lockdown, of when lockdown started and then the year that followed, we think about 300,000 people aged 65 and over were bereaved of a partner. Now, that might not have been a death because of COVID, but it was a death that happened during the pandemic, when there are all these restrictions, obviously, on funerals and being able to access your support network. So we're really, really concerned about people's ability to deal with stress and anxiety, but also with grief, and how people will move through that in the healthiest way possible. We did a report actually a couple of months ago called Grief Encounters, and we were speaking to older people who were grieving and who had sought support or not sought support, and trying to find out why and, you know, what had helped them during their bereavement. I think at the moment there's not enough funding for mental health support, for bereavement support. You know, if you're somebody of any age and you want to get support with your mental health, there is lots available to support. But what we found from the older people that we've spoken to is they're not made aware of any options that aren't medication. And that's a problem for people because they're saying, well, I already take a lot of medication and I don't really want to take any more. They're not told about what else is out there for them, despite that there are other things such as counselling and talking therapy. When you look at the national data in England, older people only make up 6% of the people that receive talking therapy, only 6%. But when you look at the statistics of recovery from things like anxiety, stress, low mood, people over 65 have the best recovery if they receive the right treatment for those conditions. So I definitely think the government could do more to invest in bereavement support and mental health support, but also make sure that people know it's there, working with health and care professionals, making sure that people of all ages know that these are treatments that could support them and that they're given the choice to decide what would work best.
Really good. Just one quick question from Margaret, who's president of our NPC Northern Ireland. Give a shout out to our people over the islands. She's wanting to know, and I guess the answer would be yes. Do you have a presence in Northern Ireland? You do, yeah. So we have some of our information and advice on our helpline, as far as I know, do cover Northern Ireland. I'd say we want to grow our presence there. I don't think it's as big as it is in some of the other nations, but we're keen to make sure that we're supporting people in Northern Ireland as well. Yeah, so we can put you in touch with Margaret. As I say, she's president of the NPC Northern Ireland. They have a very good relationship with their commissioner for older people, which makes us very jealous. But I'm sure that Margaret and the other members in Northern Ireland will be pleased to talk to you and see how they can help you along over there. Yeah. Thanks, Jan. And just to say, we do really support the idea of an Older People's Commissioner in England and Scotland. We work really closely with the Older People's Commissioner in Wales and in Northern Ireland. And we think every nation should have one to make sure that the issues that older people care about are front and centre. So, yeah, very supportive of that. Yeah, and thank you for that, because I think it is only when you're growing older that you realise how many changes are taking place for you. And all of these things that we've been talking about today, they are the perfect storm. Yeah. And there's lots of issues around how we can combat this. And this is the problem, because we have a non-listening, some people would say a non-caring government, which I tend to agree with. But we have to do it, because if we don't do it, then people coming behind us will feel, the impact just as much. So if I could go now to the panel and just ask some extra questions of each of you, and then we'll round up. I think for this one, obviously there was a question around people who age without children. Now, unfortunately, Sue Karen has had to leave. Obviously, she has a job in the House of Commons to do, but we will write to her and ask her opinion of that. I don't know if Morgan has anything she would like to say about that. Yeah, we're very aware at Independent Age of those aging without children, and we've got good connections with the organisation that support them. And we did some work. We always try and make sure that we include stories of people aging without children, because it's too quick for people to assume that, oh, well, your family can step in, they can care for you, they can help you claim benefits, whatever it might be, if somebody loses capacity and can't do those things themselves. But that is not a given. And we know that people aging without children often miss out on the support that they need, whether that be care, whether that be support after a bereavement, whether it be financial support and knowing what they're entitled to. So we're really concerned about those people as a group of people. And we did do some research on looking at them as a specific group, which I'm happy to share in the chat, and some of the challenges that they face. I think with all of these things, they all overlap, don't they? I mean, if you're having trouble financially, you're probably also worrying about your health, or you might need care, and all of these things, as you said, Jan, they sort of combine together to make a perfect storm. So yeah, I think that group really we need to make sure that information and support is tailored to them. Yeah, and I think for me, we come back to digital exclusion again, because I'm on Zoom. I manage it. But in 10 years' time, I might just hate the idea of having a laptop and, you know, being on the internet. And of course, the huge amount of money that, you know, scammers make from everything, but mainly, I think, over educated a research over the pandemic and how much the older people that went online were scammed. And scammers seem to be very, very good at what they do, and they change. And we try to keep up with them, but we can't. So digital exclusion is something that really is something that we want to tackle. And we know that there will be people within the NPC and older people out in the community that will never want to engage with this kind of thing. And we have to make sure that there are alternatives to the access. Now, I've written 3 times to the DCMS, Oliver Dowden, and now Nadine Dorries, and asked the question, what will the government do to ensure that there are alternatives for those, not just pensioners, there are families that cannot afford broadband or don't want to, and they don't have the devices and they can't afford them. What will the government do to make sure that alternatives are available? And we get the same reply. They give us a lot of information about which we already know is out there, about how to access people to training and to signpost them to get themselves online if that's what they want. They've never actually answered the question, what they're going to do about alternatives. So we really need to have a really strong strategy over that. And like I said before, we'll be looking at another webinar to tackle, that kind of thing. But I've got a question. We have our own digital working party, and Jenny is the chair of that. And what she's saying is digital exclusion is a key contributory factor in poverty. So, and like I said, exactly 1 year ago, we launched our own campaign, Connections for All, to help older people get online and to try and ensure that those who are not or choose not to be were able to not be disadvantaged. And I've explained the difficulties that we're having with that. So are there any solutions that we haven't looked at that you can suggest, apart from calling on Westminster Government to have a more targeted funding for digital skills and to close the digital divide? What advice can we take from you that would make our campaign more effective? Because we really struggle about this. So each of you in turn. I'll start with you, Lord Seeker. You're very much aware of the issues, aren't you? Yeah.
Well, thanks, Jan. It's a fascinating discussion. I really think, in a sense, I go back to the last Labour Party manifesto, which talked about free broadband available, because broadband is become about as essential as water, gas, electricity for people. And many people, not just senior citizens, many low-income households just can't afford the cost. And the cost of broadband this year is going to rise by about 10% as well. So they are doing RPI plus 3.7, 3.9% range. And people also need access to equipment. There was a time when people could go to local libraries, but most of them have shut down those services because they simply can't afford to maintain them. And COVID intervened as well. So I think a starting point should be a free broadband. And at the moment, the government's given £5 billion to BT to build broadband services. But the beauty for BT is not only it pockets the $5 billion, but also any future income arising from that asset. I think really, if the government is providing funding, the quid pro quo should be a free access to people, or at least senior citizens and lower income households. So that is sort of one policy I would support.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're going to be meeting with BT next week on the issue of the digital phone switchover. which not a lot of people know about, and
Yeah.
those that have experienced it have not had good experiences. So we'll bear that in mind, Lord Seeker, when we meet with him. And he is a director of change, I think, this person we're meeting. So that's a good idea to put towards him. What do you think, Tom? Are you?
Yeah, so the digital exclusion is a hugely important and difficult issue. I think I'd agree with the thrust of what Lord Seeker was saying there. I think the lead on stuff like this has to come from government and to an extent regulators as well. I think if slightly outside my area expertise, but if you look in the banking sector, and I know that work is going on at I think being led by the Treasury at the moment, looking at ensuring that bank closures don't mean that people can't access a local bank within, I think it's something like a mile of their homes. I think that's potentially positive. I think reforms like that have worked in other countries as well and are incredibly important. Things like closure of local services like post offices as well are really difficult for lots of people in different communities, both older people and also younger people who just aren't part of the digital community. And I think there's a broader issue as well around vulnerable customers. And so we obviously talk about people who are digitally excluded. They're potentially going to be people who aren't able to access services, but also I think there's generally positively, there's been a broader focus from people like the Financial Conduct Authority and others in ensuring that people who are in vulnerable positions for various reasons, whether that's because they're digitally excluded, whether that's because they're suffering mental health issues, whether it's because they're obviously dementia and things like that are an increasing issue in financial services. I think there's more focus being put onto issues like that at the moment, but I would agree not enough is being done at the moment and not enough focus is being placed on it.
What did you come across, Morgan, when you were doing your research? Was that part of?
Yeah, so I think digital exclusion obviously affects people in every aspect of their life, because you can get better deals if you're online shopping, for example. You can get discounts when you pay for things by direct debit. If you can contact, I don't know about you, I needed to get a bit of medication that was quite simple. I did it all online. I didn't need to phone up or go in, and that was my personal choice and my personal preference. So I think from our point of view, the first thing I'd say is maintaining choice, because we speak to a lot of people, and I'm sure I've met some actually at local NPC events where people have said, I choose not to be online. It's not actually because I can't afford it, and it's not because I'm nervous, I don't want to. So we would always say maintaining paper-based communication, and giving people a choice. However, for lots of people, digital can open them up to new things. And I chaired a DCMS Tackling Loneliness Network Coalition last year, specifically looking at loneliness, but digital exclusion came up. And some of the things we were thinking was, a lot of the people we spoke to, they just didn't get why it would improve their lives, and they thought it was a bit too much hassle. So we were talking about funding peer-to-peer organisations who could have somebody who's in quite a similar situation, similar age, saying, actually, this is what I get from it, and this is how you could benefit. So funding local organisations who provide that training and equipment for people, I think, is really important, because for those who do want to try it, cost can be a real barrier. So targeting those on low income and making sure they've got what they need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what we're finding. And as Lord Seeker said, broadband costs are going to be going up quite significantly. So there may be people that are currently using broadband who may find that, particularly with the rise in food, the rise in energy, local authority, council tax rises, everything that takes every penny out of your purse and your pocket, they may have to make critical decisions, not just between eating and heating, but also whether they have access to a computer. And that then isolates them, particularly if they live alone. Yeah. So there's a whole, you can see what those decisions have done in terms of people's, disposable incomes, if you like. They have to dispose of it in priority order for them. And like I say, some people, as they get older, can't cope with new programs, new software, and they just give up on it. Basically, I think where we're at with pensions, Tom, is, the downgrading of occupational pensions now to a state where people who first went into them will not get the projected income in their pension as we know it. So we haven't done a lot on occupational pensions, but we include it in our all of our things. So I think what we'd like to do is perhaps come back to you for maybe I've got a couple of questions, come back to you, maybe get a sense of where we could go with that. I think the last question would be, and this is to all of you, there is a distinct feeling within NPC members that there may just well be a sense of ageism in government. Do you think that's right? I'll come to you, Lord Seeker, first. Yeah.
I suppose if you look at the way senior citizens have been treated, there is certain truth in that. Christmas bonus, £10, unchanged since 1972. Winter fuel payment, unchanged since 2011. Incredibly low state pension. Government's not caring that about 25,000 of our senior citizens freeze to death every year because they have to make the choice, as we say, between heating and eating, suspending the triple lock. So there is certain kind of truth in that. I think governments either assume, the Conservatives assume that senior citizens are going to vote for them, Labour assume they're not going to vote for them. So either way, they don't really pay enough attention to it. In my view, senior citizens have enough voting power. They should not vote for any political party. And I say this as a Labour peer, don't vote for any political party unless it offers you a state pension aligned with the living wage and free universal social care. If parties are not offering that, don't support them. But that is not just for the benefit of senior citizens now, it is for the benefit of future retirees too, because otherwise they too will get miserably low state pensions and they will struggle to get social care. We are having a bill brought back to the Lords, and I think it's next week, by former Health Secretary Peter Lilly, who wants to link social care to insurance policy. It's a bill I opposed before. I'm hoping to oppose again, though I have some illness in a family at the moment to deal with. But basically he's saying, people should just pay for this insurance. But currently there is no insurance company in the UK which offers insurance for social care. So therefore he's proposing that the government actually set up a company to sell this. Government, which I should add has the support of the Conservative front bench in the Lords. And it is an incredibly worrying development. My feeling is that the government is testing this out to see how it goes down in both chambers of Parliament and with the people, and this will then become a role model for the NHS. Therefore, we have to try to defeat it. So I think there is a certain kind of ageism. This insurance thing will only help rich retirees. Peter Lilly suggesting they need to pay an insurance premium of £16,000, as though £16,000 is just stuffed under the mattress somewhere and somebody's going to get it out, when the median lifetime savings of people are less than that. And then he's suggesting people will offer a charge on their house. That means kick out your children and second generation who's living in the house. It just doesn't make any sense. And I earlier put a link in the chat box, which provides a critique of this proposed legislation and also debunks this idea, which we hear all the time, whether it is to do with state pensions, social care, NHS, or we can't afford it without a massive hike in income tax. That is utterly untrue. And I provide about 15 examples in the paper I put in earlier in the chat box, where we can raise over £100 billion easily without hiking income tax, or national insurance for the masses.
Yeah, thank you, Lord. We have your paper and we will circulate it, because I think it is about time now that we know that it's coming before the House next week. We'll make sure that people have a serious talk with their MP. Yeah. Right. Okay. Do you want to make any comment, Tom or Morgan?
Happy to briefly. Yeah. I mean, I would hope that there isn't any overt ageism or any other kinds of ism coming from government. I think that there are obviously various policies that affect various different people in different ways. I suspect that younger people on benefits who saw the universal credit £20 uplift removed might have felt discriminated against as a result of that. I think splitting things into ages can sometimes not be the most helpful way of doing things as well. I think obviously you need to look at the way that policies affect different income groups and different ages, but I think sometimes the debate around intergenerational unfairness, I think, ends up pitting one generation against the other, whereas as Lord Seeker said, I think we need to think about this as a fact that benefits that people receive now are benefits that younger people are going to receive into the future, and that's incredibly important. So I would hope that there isn't ageism in what the government is doing, but I can see that particularly for 1950s born women who suffered particularly from the state pension age increase, why it might feel that way.
Morgan?
Yeah, just to build on what Tom said, I definitely think for nobody, it's never helpful having an us and them, is it? For any generations, like I work in this sector because I really care about people in later life, and I have family members I deeply love who have been let down by the system. So I think for us to improve the systems, we all need to be behind it. People of all ages need to be fighting for improvements to later life. In terms of ageism, I feel that it's not overt ageism. However, it is older people missing out on mental health treatment when people of other ages are having more targeted information and advice to get them to have that support. It is older people not getting pension credit, whereas some benefits for some working age people, the numbers are high. And it's not that there's a problem. That's brilliant that the numbers are high, that people are getting what they're entitled to, but the government need to target their attention. If there are reasons why people in later life are not receiving the money they're entitled to, and there are different reasons that are trickier to handle, then we need a plan to tackle them and to handle them. If there's stigma attached, if there's people not wanting and thinking there's other people worse off than them, then we need to target those people and make sure they get what they're entitled to. So in that sense, I want to see sort of more money and more force to make sure that older people get what they need, rather than it being seen as too difficult to deal with.
Yeah, thank you for that, Morgan, because that kind of chimes with what we want to do. And you can try as hard as you like, but it needs to come from the government. There was one comment in the question and answer, it wasn't a question, but a comment that says that over the years it seems that government information has got less and less and less, and it is for the government to promote those benefits that people can access to, whether that's for working people or retired people or people who are disabled but want to work, and they can actually work with some support that the government could do. So I think that's where our quest lies, is making sure that they do get that information out there. But tackling those people that shy away from filling in forms and giving particularly personal information is something that, like you say, the elderly lady who said she was sure that there was other people worse off than her and wouldn't take money from them. I think it's actually being able to go to people and giving them the confidence to feel that they are themselves in need, and it's acceptable for them to take that help. So I think that's a big job to do. Well, all that remains for me now is to say thank you to each and every one of our panelists. I mean, I know that Karen had to go, but we thanked her beforehand. I think hopefully that what we've done is opened up the understanding that all of the things that we are faced with in the future as older people are coming together right now in readiness for April, when the whole big balloon will go up. So we need to take away what's been said and look at it and see how we make a profile for ourselves and for other organisations working with older people like Independent Age, like Age UK. It's not without, I suppose, the knowledge that we have, that we do these things. It's without the understanding of the people that you try to engage with, i.e. government ministers, government departments. But we keep going, we won't give up, because it's not necessarily the right thing to do. But any help that we can get from anyone, particularly if someone has a friendly Conservative MP that we can get to talk to, that would be good. We do circulate everything to every MP, and we do also circulate our affiliates and ask them to engage with their MP. We've done that over a number of things and a very poor response. It's usually the same MPs that give us the responses. So there's obviously a job to do there. So I will just say thank you to everybody. Thank you to Bev and Jonathan for helping us out with today. Without you, it wouldn't happen. Thank you to our audience, because otherwise we'd be just talking amongst ourselves. And I hope that you find this really interesting. Keeping an eye out on our website. We will put the link up to the recording if you want to go back and listen to either all of it or particular points of it. And we will be taking those questions. Jonathan will be saving them off, and we'll be looking at how we can get them answered and get back to you. Again, if you thought this webinar worthwhile, it does cost us money. If you could and want to give just a small donation, we would be really grateful. If not, we hope to see you another time. Okay, so thank you so much to everybody, and we'll see you again in the future. So bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.